Paul's been living the dream for a while, and I wanted to have the opportunity for him to talk about his personal experiences as well as what he sees and is experiencing in the present day in the Austin and the United States relative to angel capital, and potentially giving you some advice about how to pitch people in that area. So, Paul,
thanks, Chris.
Yep.
Appreciate it. Thank you. I'm honored to be here. I spent most of my career in Silicon Valley, so I think that's why I'm up here. I've got some perspective on what it takes to raise money there and how things work differently. And I've been in Austin and Texas for about 7 years, and here I've been very enamored with this question of where the money comes from, where it goes, and why. I work with a venture capital firm directly here that's raising money, but I'm also involved in an international effort to develop the World Trade Center in Austin. And so I'm particularly intrigued by and interested in the fact that so many different entrepreneurs from throughout the world are coming here first, in many cases, something that often didn't happen in Silicon Valley. Why is it that Silicon Valley is its own ecosystem, an ecosystem unto itself, and it's in Texas where we've got a lot of interest in what's going on, and frankly, even foreign direct investment coming into Texas. I'll share a bit about my background more as we go. I'm not going to give you the usual title and here's how to contact me kind of stuff, because if you just look up SEO Brian on the internet, you'll find me. I started my career at Yahoo, and so I do have a search background, but that was about 20 years ago. And so I used to be known as SEO for those reasons. More recently, it seems to fit better as startup evangelist or startup entrepreneur O'Brien. So if you look me up, you'll find my phone number and my email address and so forth. So what I want to share with you is that perspective that Chris touched on about Boulder, and the fact that economies, particularly in the United States, certainly throughout the world, are incredibly different. And that has almost everything to do with where the money moves and why. I actually grew up in Michigan. And so I'd like to point out that I'm not really from California. I grew up in cereal country where Kellogg was based in Battle Creek, Michigan. And I grew up when the auto industry was struggling. And I grew up when the pharmaceutical industry there was struggling, frankly, because of globalization. And that entire economy, when I was a kid, died. And as a result of that, I found my way to Arizona, and then I got recruited up to Yahoo in Silicon Valley. Moved here about 7 years ago, bought my boots as fast as I could because, frankly, I didn't care for California for any other reason than the fact that it was wonderful for startups and professional development. The reason I share that a little bit of a narrative is I'm a big fan of Peter Drucker. He was an economist in the 70s and 80s. Wrote a lot of great books about innovation and entrepreneurship and startup ecosystems. And I'm paraphrasing a bit of what he characterized rather eloquently, that philosophies are what define a culture of a region, right? Portugal and the people there have a certain set of philosophies, beliefs that they care about. Same is true of Texas, same is true of California, and so forth. That creates a culture. That culture is really what results in the communities that are there. And it's those communities, places like Capital Factory, places like downtown Austin, places like West Austin, where I live, those communities are what really manifest in businesses, certain kinds of businesses. And those businesses ultimately create industries, those industries result in economies, and it's those economies that are a result of those philosophies. And it's because of that perspective that my second favorite book is Simon Sinek's Start With Why. If you haven't read that and you are pitching your startup, if you're raising capital, you absolutely need to. Start With Why is the very premise that everything has to do with your philosophies and your approach to what you're doing, what you think about and what you believe about. And that encapsulates that entire premise, right? Why are we in Silicon Valley? Why are we raising money here? Why does this industry, this search industry that I was a part of, why does that exist in Silicon Valley? Why isn't it in Denver? Why isn't it in Boulder? Why isn't it in Texas? Why are you here in Texas today? Why is it that Texas might be particularly interesting and intriguing to what you're doing? Being able to share that and tell that is ultimately what the investors are looking for. But figuring out why that's the case is particularly difficult, right? Venture capital investors are not seed stage investors. They are not incubators. They are not angel investors. Angel investors and incubators are part of the local ecosystem. They understand exactly what you're doing, where you are, why you're doing it. They've got an understanding for what it is that goes on in your community. Venture capital investors follow patterns. They follow the market. They follow the industries. They follow the economies at large. I did a lot of work with Sequoia Capital, first round capital, Shasta Ventures when I was still in Silicon Valley. And I did work with them in particular because the things that they funded were the things that I was familiar with in Silicon Valley. They were consistent with the kind of work that I did in search, in social media, in those technologies that were based in Silicon Valley. Their risk is tied to that economy. And one of the mistakes that a lot of folks make when they think about Silicon Valley is they think of it in terms of just San Francisco. When I moved here about 7 years ago, folks would tell me they're going to San Francisco to raise money. Nobody raises money in San Francisco. Silicon Valley is 4 different major cities that are as big as Austin, frankly, and all the money is roughly here, about an hour away. Okay? What's interesting about Texas and Austin is that an hour away from here is San Antonio. San Antonio is the 2nd largest cybersecurity industry in the country. And not a lot of folks appreciate that, recognize that, and know that. San Antonio is a hub of a lot of the veterans and military folks and military investment in the United States. Not a lot of folks know that. You go a little bit further outside of that to about 2 hours away and you hit Dallas and Houston. And in this region of the world, you've got the 13th largest GDP in the country. I'm sorry, in the world. In the world. Much more significant than Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley, though, is contributing a lot more GDP to the economy, and that's why those venture capital investors are able to participate there. Now, what's exciting? Why am I here? Why are you here? What's exciting is that Paul Graham, right, one of the founders of ECommerce, has shared a lot of thoughts about what it takes to create these new startup communities. And what he's bulleted there, what I bulleted there, is very consistent with the way Austin grew up. It's very consistent with the Austin economy, right? Austin has a lot of young folks. Austin is a vibrant food scene. Austin is an exciting place to be. And because of that, and because of the proximity to Dallas and Houston and San Antonio, because of the tremendous tech investment through Tesla and NASA and the military and so forth throughout the rest of Texas, it's Austin that is becoming the most significant part of the economy of innovation in the United States. Becoming. It's why we're always at the top of the startup lists. We are still a startup city, frankly. We aren't quite there. We don't quite rival Silicon Valley. But it's important to appreciate why that's the case. And you can appreciate from Paul Graham's perspective, like I said, young metropolitan city, but a tremendously popular suburban place to live. It's inexpensive, it's reasonable. There's so many advantages to being here as opposed to being in the valley, particularly the fact that we are organically developing our own venture capital sources, right? Silicon Valley is an ecosystem unto itself. It's why there isn't a tremendous amount of foreign interest in Silicon Valley. Everything's coming into Texas because our angel groups in Austin and throughout the rest of Texas are the largest in the country. The Dallas Angel Network, the Houston Angel Network, the Austin Angel Network, Central Texas Angel Network are the biggest in the country. And those investors are figuring out what it means to participate in the larger venture capital rounds at later stages. We're developing it all from within this ecosystem, and we have a particular interest in doing it with y'all, doing it internationally. Play, right? Okay. Important to appreciate in thinking about where you raise money and why that matters in understanding how Silicon Valley actually did develop, okay? How it did develop. Now, you can read all this. I'm not going to read it for you, but Silicon Valley essentially developed around government interests and private equity interests out of New York that helped fund the venture capital ecosystem, helped fund the early iterations of technology through microwave and radar, that led to semiconductor, that led to the computer, that led to the internet, that led to the smartphone, and so on and so forth. And the reason I stage it and point it out that way is not many other tech ecosystems think in terms of that evolution. They don't think in terms of how one piece of technology in that city or in that region of the world led to something else. The reasons venture capital investment is so prolific in Silicon Valley and in New York is because venture capitalists follow patterns. They follow economies, they follow trends. They aren't interested in a single startup that might be a unicorn. They're interested in the fact that the experience that resulted in the smartphone is because of the experience that created the radar, right? That the radar enabled people to develop the semiconductor, that enabled people to figure out how to move money into technology ecosystems in more public markets, that enabled folks to develop the personal computer, that enabled people to create the internet, that enabled the internet to create search engines, that enabled people to create social networks. And so the question is, how does that pattern exist in your part of the world or in Texas? Everyone is moving into Texas in the United States. And so one pattern that we're paying attention to is that fact, that the net population of those major cities, New York, San Francisco, and LA in the past 10 years is actually down slightly, and everything in Texas is up. Everybody is moving into this part of the world. And a lot of the research being done in the venture capital ecosystem about Texas today is who is moving here, right? What is the pattern that's shifting people from the coasts into this part of the world? And it's not cost of living, it's not a better place to do business, right? There are industries that we do particularly well in Texas that they don't do as well on the coasts, that are important for you guys to understand so that you can figure out if you should be raising money here, you should be developing here, you should be getting your hub into the United States through Texas, or frankly, if you should be out in Silicon Valley raising capital, or out in New York raising capital. The reason that's so critical is while I'm talking about how exciting Austin and Texas is, this chart is a little hard to read, so we'll send it, but in spite of my talking about how exciting Austin is, there is a big gap here. There is, in fact, a huge gap in Texas. The average deal size through venture capital in Austin and in Texas is roughly $5 million. The average deal size in Silicon Valley is roughly $17 million. So in terms of raising substantial amounts of capital to grow companies, we aren't even close yet. We aren't even close yet. Now, we know that, we recognize that, we're doing a lot about it. But when you think about the difference between angel investment and those large angel groups that we have here, the individuals who are deciding where to put money based on their understanding of the local community, and you think instead about a venture capital fund, which is two partners managing private investments, managing limited partners, managing trust funds and family funds that are putting hundreds of millions of dollars into their hands to make decisions for them, you can start to appreciate that until we figure out the pattern of technology development in this region of the world, investors here will continue to behave more like angels because they'll want to make their own decisions before they start to see these patterns emerge in this region that enable venture capitalists to say, stick with me, we're able to put your money collectively into transportation technology, for example, which is at home here in Texas. It's just not obvious yet. It's just not apparent yet because there isn't enough of it going on. Or put it into agriculture technology, which is certainly at home here in Texas as opposed to the coasts. Those are the people we're seeing move into the state. People that have been on the coast working in technology, working in transportation, working in agriculture, working in clean tech, energy, working in media, film, music, journalism, advertising, things that on the coast historically have been dominant there, but are now requiring a new approach, a bigger economy, a bigger industry that can help those technologies innovate much more substantially. We're seeing this number, this first number, shift up very, very quickly. Not though in the context of thinking about it as just Austin, but in the context of thinking of it as Texas, as a region, right? Thinking about the fact that an hour away is San Antonio, and 2 hours away is Houston, okay? And you can see that a little bit more clearly with a study of capital investment from a few years ago, that in each city, the coasts are regions. And we're just getting there, right? We're just getting there here in Texas. Now, the same study done 5 years previously had little pinpricks in Texas. This part of the world is exploding. That's why you're here. That's why I'm here. That's why I made the move. That's why I'm passionate about what's going on in the venture capital ecosystem. Now, this is another complicated slide. It's a complicated slide for a reason. This is some work, some research work that I did with Texas State to help folks understand exactly where to get money at what stage so that you set the right expectations with the investors that you're talking about. The reason that's so critically important. So left-hand side is early stage. Those of you that are raising your seed funds, that you're looking for angel investors to help you get off the ground. That's on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side is your growth stage, your private equity stages, where you start becoming massive companies. Left-hand side is small amount of money to a significant amount of money. The reason this is important is when I moved into Texas, the first thing that became very, very apparent to me is that all of the advice, all of the feedback, all of the mentorship, all of the perspective on what it takes to raise money comes from right here, okay? All of the advice given to entrepreneurs in this part of the world traditionally has been seed angel oriented. You only need $250,000. And in Texas, that's fairly true. You only need $250,000. Now, $250,000 US is not going to get you a very good toehold on a new market throughout the rest of the country, let alone the world. okay? And the venture capital community, and certainly the private equity firms, know that, right? And so they'll advise very, very different things about how to raise capital, how to set the right expectations with your investors, how to think about building your company, how to pitch your company. The reason for that is, of course, if you're in Silicon Valley, not only does it cost more simply to be there, but the average seed round is something more like $600,000 or $750,000. Okay? So imagine the challenge of entrepreneurs in this part of the world or in other parts of the country or other parts of Texas getting advice that says you only need $250,000. I want you to chase a lean bootstrap kind of model. I want you to focus on customer validation. Let's just prove that you can make money. And then you go to California to try to raise money and they look at you sideways. You can't do anything with that amount of capital. We don't really care about whether or not customers are giving you revenue yet. We want to understand how you're going to dominate a market, how you're going to get to at least 20% of the market share, right? We need to understand how you're going to be a $500 million company. You have to be talking to these folks much earlier in the conversations that you're having about raising money. But you also have to appreciate the expectations of these folks, and the way to talk to these folks and the way to raise capital with those folks is vastly different than the way to raise capital with the venture capital firms, okay? Now, you look at Silicon Valley, this green line was put together by Texas State. This green line looks a lot like a startup growth curve. But that green line is actually a reflection of the capital that gets invested into startups at each of those stages by each of those firms. Makes sense that it's pretty consistent with how a startup grows. At this stage, we're talking to these folks, I only need that amount of money. Because I meet their expectations, and because I understand what it takes to get here, thanks to Paul Graham, thanks to all the folks who write about these curves, I know what I'm going to have to talk about in order to get to this stage in 5 or 10 years, and so I can start to appeal to the incubators and the angel investors at the right point. I can appeal to the venture capitalists at the right point. But you have to appreciate the expectations at each of those stages. The reason there's a gap in Austin and in Texas and in the rest of the world, frankly, for the most part, is because the curve doesn't look the same. Austin has a tremendous amount of very, very early stage seed capital. It's really easy to get $100,000 in Austin. And then it tapers off. It tapers down. It's difficult to get $250,000, to get $350,000, to get $400,000 in Austin, okay? Because we're advised to be chasing customers very early, and so of course then the angels just want to see more customers. And if you have revenue, what do you need more money for? You're making money, right? That the advice is a little inconsistent with what it takes then to appeal to the later early stage investors, the angels. Now, Austin has these substantial angel groups. And so when it's time to raise $750,000, $1 million, it's not difficult. It's not difficult here, okay? But because we have six venture capital firms in Texas that are the size of those in California, almost nothing gets funded by that ecosystem in Texas. And you hear that we still have to go to California and New York to raise money in Texas. Now, I'm sharing the doom and gloom with you for a reason, right? We're fixing that very, very quickly. All of these folks are moving into the ecosystem. The money is desperately trying to figure out how to work within this ecosystem. And in order to do that, we all have to understand what the patterns are. We have to understand why you're here. We have to understand what it is that you're doing, what we're doing here. What does ag tech look like? What does real estate tech look like? What does ed tech look like? What does media technology look like? That's what's coming into Texas. That's what this quadrant of the ecosystem is trying to figure out. So we can buoy those stages of funding and get them to a more traditional startup and innovation kind of growth curve. I think I only have a couple more. And actually, I'm going to breeze past a couple. Evidence of that is the fact that the Bay Area last year lost roughly $500 million in venture capital. It shifted out of the Bay Area. Now, the reason I keep highlighting some doom and gloom about Austin and some of these gaps we have is, in fact, Austin, too, lost a bunch of venture capital last year, okay? The coasts, Seattle and New York are next. The coasts are losing money. But I want to be clear that they're losing money to places like Texas. That even though we lost a lot of money in Texas, it's because the venture capitalists here are trying to figure out where to put it. A lot of it shifted to Dallas. A lot of it shifted to Houston. A lot of it shifted to San Antonio. Okay? I'm involved in Texas-oriented things. I'm the founder of the Texas Technology Council. If you've met with or you've heard about the Austin Technology Council, the cities of Texas have these technology entities that are helping foster innovation. There are very few things here that do it as a region. Okay? So I'm involved in the Texas Technology Council. I'm involved in a program called TexNext. I've given this talk to Latin America, to Singapore, to Ireland, to Pakistan, and now Portugal all in the last month, because TexNext is focused on figuring out why we have all this international interest in Texas and what we do about it. And my goal is to help show that we don't have it all figured out, but there are a lot of reasons why we're figuring it out much more effectively than anywhere else in the world. Right? It's moving away from the valley for a reason. Here are the reasons. 1, 2, I think I got 3 left. So half an hour. Thank you for your attention. 3 left. Here are the reasons. On the left-hand side is what you often hear about with regard to the culture of Silicon Valley, the work ethic of Silicon Valley, the way in which people are building their companies, the expectations that the investors there have. Right? It's ambitious. They are disruptive. They steal ideas. Right? They take intellectual property from other parts of the world and they build Googles and Facebooks and Twitters. Right? We hear that about them. It's always about investment. You don't lean bootstrap anything in Silicon Valley. You are always seeking investment. You're always trying to figure out what it takes to build something more substantial. It's experience. It's experience, though, based on that history, that progression of the way technology works. Right? They couldn't build the internet there without having built the PC, without having built the internet infrastructure to make that possible. But because they did that, they had the experience to understand what the internet is possible of before anywhere else in the world. Okay? And in spite of what most people think about Silicon Valley, because it's kind of hard to break into, Chris and I were just talking about this, Silicon Valley is in fact highly collaborative to a competitive fault. Right? They collaborate with other companies in the ecosystem that are doing the exact same thing. Why? Because they're trying to change everything. They're trying to change the entire economy. They're trying to bring Uber to market. They're trying to bring Google to market and just disrupt and change everything. And so they're happy to work alongside the people who are competing with them, knowing that it's about developing the industry and the economy because that's where the money goes. That it's not about just winning and being successful as a single entrepreneur and a single startup. Okay? That's the culture there. The culture in Austin and in Texas is on the right-hand side. And these are the words you hear. We're focused on the lifestyle. We're focused on keeping Austin weird. We're focused on balance. Frankly, a lot of those characteristics are why we're all moving here. It's why I moved here. I got 3 kids. I didn't want to raise kids in California under this lifestyle. Right? We do bootstrap things. We are lean. We are entrepreneurial. There are more startups per capita in Austin than anywhere else in the country. Why? Because everybody's got a startup. It's encouraged, right? There's no reason for you not to be doing something for yourself. Here, the punchline in the whole talk is that those 2 distinct sets of cultures and characteristics, those 2 philosophies about entrepreneurship, about startups, result in different ways in which people talk about what they're doing. Different ways in which they pitch. Okay? Part of that is driven by the expectations and the advice and the perspective that's given within that culture to the entrepreneurs. Right? The fact that for the most part, they're angel investors here who also want lifestyle-oriented businesses. They want less risky opportunities so that they can enjoy their life here. The ambition of Silicon Valley is forcing people to think bigger, think harder, think about what it takes to put $20 million to work, not $250,000 to work. Okay? And what happens is, I do a lot of pitch training. What happens is you hear it in the way people talk. Silicon Valley pitches by starting with why. That's why I kind of started with why. I didn't jump into what I was going to talk about. I didn't show you an agenda. I wanted you to think about how culture and philosophy affects the way you talk to investors, right? Why? With whom? You hear that Silicon Valley is always funding teams. They are. Teams of good people just get checks in spite of what they're doing. Because there's an understanding that good people, the right people who understand those trends, who understand the market, who understand the opportunities, the right people can deliver a return on just about anything. Okay? And at the very end of the pitch, they finally say, and here's what we're doing and why we need some money. Right? Now, why is that? Because the investors there understand the technology. You don't have to explain it to them. You don't have to teach them what it is. You don't have to teach them what you're doing. You don't have to teach them how it grows. You don't have to teach them whether or not the money that you're putting to work makes sense, because they know. They know if you're asking for $250,000 to seed stage a startup, you probably don't know what you're doing. You're asking for the wrong amount of money given what you're doing and the fact that that isn't going to get you very far, right? They know that. And so the narrative has to shift when you're raising money in those ecosystems. On the right-hand side is the pitch you often hear. In these other cities, not just Austin, in these other cities where Paul Graham's and Eric Ries, the lean startup kind of pitches are taught. You need to convey a problem and a solution, right? Why do you need to convey a problem and a solution? Because I have to tell you what's going on. I have to explain to you what we're doing. I got to explain to you how it works. And inevitably, the feedback you get before you even have a chance to ask for money is how many customers agree with you. How much money have you been able to get out of customers? Okay? And it's not right or wrong, don't misunderstand me. That is how you have to raise capital in Austin. That is how you have to raise capital in Texas. Okay? Because you have to educate the angels about what you're doing. You have to explain to them more quickly why you're doing it here, how you got this started in Portugal. You have to convey to them all of the ways in which you're going to alleviate the risk of that investment so that they're more comfortable with what you're doing. And the challenge that you have is when you hop on a plane and go to Silicon Valley and you start with that, they're going to go, yeah, I get it. I get it. You don't have to explain to me what you're doing. I know. Right? Tell me what you need. Right? Tell me about your team. Tell me you understand what you're doing. Okay? By the same token, this pitch here often doesn't work. Often doesn't work, right? When you start with the big market opportunity, I want to build the next social platform for mobile. Folks here will look at you like, okay. Explain that to me. How does that work? What's it cost? Yeah, that's too much risk. How much have you started? How much have you tried? Right? You have to understand where you're raising money in order to have the right conversations with folks. So, why are we here? A lot of the research, why are we in Austin? A lot of the research I've been doing the last year with some of the universities is to figure out what that pattern is. I don't think we've nailed it specifically yet, but we're close. 30 years ago, Austin was at the epicenter of technology, just like Silicon Valley was. We have a rich semiconductor industry here. But because of the cultures and philosophies of Texas, because we weren't ambitious, because we weren't as aggressive about disrupting things, Silicon Valley figured out how to take the semiconductor and build the computer and build the internet. And we didn't. We kind of stayed in the semiconductor industry. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just important to appreciate that that's what we did here. Because of that, though, we got an enterprise infrastructure. And you'll hear a lot of enterprise software as a service, a lot of B2B, B2E kind of stuff here in Texas. Okay? We didn't figure out consumer like the Valley did. Now, that's the somewhat critical past, but the beauty of that is it means that Texas is now turning to all of the traditional industries in which we have strength, tremendous strength relative to the coast, like energy, like real estate, like, believe it or not, retail and advertising because of Dallas, the fourth largest retail industry in the United States. Like e-commerce. Most of the major e-commerce platforms are based here in Austin. Magento, BigCommerce, Volusion, if you know those names, if you work in e-commerce. Why? Because right up the road is a lot of corporate retail. JCPenney, Best Buy, Radio Shack. Okay? That history is making us look at things like social media, which Silicon Valley invented, but we're now looking at social media here with all of these brilliant data scientists and engineers who are part of the semiconductor industry, and we're going, what can we learn from all that? What can we do about it? Right? How can we leverage these data sets and build social data industries? And that's giving us new perspective on what consumers are doing so that we can go chase the CPG industry, the finance industry, the education industry, the media industry, and even the food industry. There's actually a food tech ecosystem here in Austin. So as you're raising capital, one of the most important things you can do is understand why it is that you are where you are, and recognize that it's a combination of both talking to the right people at the right time, based on their experiences and their expectations, and appreciating that the reason you're in this room, the reason I'm doing this work, and I'm funded to do this work, is because that gap is closing so quickly, right? And there's an opportunity for you to be in Texas as your cornerstone into the United States, given the fact that it is arguably, almost certainly, the future of the economy of innovation in the United States, if not the world, evident in all of this international interest coming through here. We just need to figure out how to do it together. So with that, I think I'm finished. Oh, hey, no, one valuable data point. But this is it. This is where I'm done. So the map, right? The map I showed you. The Austin region is as far north as an hour that direction to Georgetown, an hour south to San Marcos. I live 45 minutes that way, right? But not many people in Austin think that way yet. Right? Downtown, this is Austin, where we are right now. In every direction you can look, that's Austin. Compared to Silicon Valley, as I pointed out, that little dot of Austin barely competes with Silicon Valley, which is 4 different cities. Right? But what's exciting is there's an international airport being built between San Antonio and Austin in 15 years. They're putting high-speed rail between each of the cities as quickly as they can afford it. that this city is spreading out like a metropolitan region as quickly as we can build. And so when you think about it in that bigger context, we're here. Right? And traditionally, most of the money is right there. Most of the money has been within a walking distance of here. Austin Ventures used to be 2 blocks that direction. Okay. But what's been happening in the last 5 years is as we've spread out, as you're looking to where to raise capital, it's all moving like it did in Silicon Valley. It's all moving out to more suburban environments. If you haven't been able to travel around Austin yet, there's a freeway called the 360. And the best place to sit and meet the venture capital community in Austin is in the coffee shops along 360. It's about a half an hour, 40 minutes that direction. So again, understanding where to raise money, given the fact that it isn't necessarily right where you're sitting right now. And certainly where you're sitting right now isn't necessarily the ideal place to be raising money given what you're doing. Right? So, now I'm done.